Davis, California. I live there right now. Woodland, California. I live near there. It's just up the highway. These are two very different towns. I've heard people call them twin towns. They are similar in that they are near each other and they have similar populations, and that's about it. Davis is obviously very different. Anyone who lives here will tell you that Davis and Woodland are very different. And I don't want to go into the full history of that, just to keep this video not too long. There's a paper I'll include in my citations by Susan Handy and someone else from University of California, Davis, that speaks about the history of Davis when it comes to their biking infrastructure and their code and things like that. I would highly recommend reading that. But the long and short of it is, in the 60s, there was a professor and his wife at UC Davis who had come back from the Netherlands, where, for anyone who doesn't know, the Netherlands are known for their bicycle infrastructure as well as planning and things like that, but especially bicycle infrastructure. And they came back from vacation and famously said, this isn't a quote, but famously felt that Davis could do the same thing. Also around this time, UC Davis itself was coming into its own. Just a few years prior, it was a Berkeley extension, UC Berkeley extension, and it recently joined the UC system as its own thing. There's a lot of extensions being done because when an extension becomes a full university, then you're going to need to make room for more students because you're going to get more students. So the chancellor at the time wanted to make the campus bicycleable. And so they did. And what followed was a lot of confusion. At this time, obviously, Davis having the first bike lanes means that before that, there wasn't really any sort of infrastructure like that. So it was sort of just a free-for-all for bicyclists on the road, having to share the road with cars. And so for those next couple of years, you had a lot of organization just of people around town surrounding this professor and his wife and some other people as well who, again, I won't get into, talking to the city council, being like, hey, we should get some infrastructure out here. There's been studies about this. There's stuff we want to try and implement. And soon enough, a lot of change was made. And in the next about decade from 60s to 70s, there's a lot of trial and some error when it comes to bicycle infrastructure because, again, this is like the first time anyone had ever done this on this continent. So by 1970, every new road in Davis had to have a bicycle lane, along with a lot of other regulation parallel to that when it comes to pedestrians and bicyclists. Having such a strong start and having a large bicycling population from the university, those things really helped to maintain the culture of Davis. And once you have that culture, it tends to stick around. When they got to the 70s, things sort of slowed down. Innovation finally stopped. Everyone felt like they were in a good place. The only other thing I have is the greenways in Davis in 1988. Where new developments, part of the development has to be dedicated to a greenway, which is basically just a place where you can put a bicycle and walking path. It's kind of like a mini park almost, just to have bike routes that are off street as well. So that was a lot of history about Davis. For right now, we're going to transition, and what we're going to transition into is note cards. And here's my plan. I did a lot of research on a lot of best practices and findings in papers surrounding what makes good urban planning. And so we're going to go through a lot of that, and then we're going to take a look at Woodland and see what we can do, we can't do, and talk about maybe some of the nuances, some of the consequences of these sort of things. Let's do it. Bicyclists consume. Owners, a lot of shop owners tend to believe that bicyclists do not consume as much as someone who might drive somewhere. The evidence isn't incredibly strong as to whether bicyclists consume more than cars, but we can at least say that they probably consume about the same amount. And why that's important is when owners feel this way, then when they're advocating for themselves, they are not going to be super excited about bike lanes. And so this can end up having a ripple effect where bicyclists have worse infrastructure, which is not what we want. So, those who need bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure the most often are the least to get it. Now, who needs it? The biggest group I would argue that needs this infrastructure are people who can't afford a car or for people that cannot drive a car. Now, it's been found that these people often have worse bicycle infrastructure. They call it higher stress, and what that means is it's less safe and people are less likely to use it because of that. A few other groups I can think of, how about children going to school? What if they don't have a bus? What if they miss a bus? Another group that I think about a lot is the elderly. And the reason why I think about them is because the elderly in the US compared to other places are often shortchanged in terms of ways that they can get around, because when you build places where you need a car to get around, when you're old enough and you can't drive, suddenly your autonomy is gone, right? And so we need pedestrian infrastructure, bicycle infrastructure, and public transportation so that after we retire and after maybe our driving abilities are not as good, we're still able to live a life. And that goes for elderly people as well as so many other groups. The next thing we're going to talk about is ANCS, which is something I just made up. But it's aesthetics, noise level, community, and safety. Now, I'm sourcing this from an older paper from the San Francisco Bay Area, and basically it asks people what qualities they look for in a neighborhood. And while that study was done 50 years ago, I do think it's still relevant. I think most of us can agree that those 4 things are all things that we look for in communities. And so as we keep going through these, let's keep that in the back of our minds, and then later we might talk a little bit more about what causes those things and what hampers those things. One thing that serves most of those things, to be frank, let's grab this, is parks. Parks tend to be pretty aesthetic if you're into nature. Noise level, they tend to act as a noise buffer for maybe a more busy street. And community, obviously, that's the number one thing that parks are for. Doesn't add too much to safety, but while we're here, let's talk more about parks. Now, I don't have a paper for this part. However, I do want to talk a little bit about Jane Jacobs. Now, Jane Jacobs was a community activist. This is back in the 60s. Jane Jacobs advocated a lot for mixed-use planning and people-centric planning, which is something that was very different at the time. And decades later, a lot of us are still talking about Jane Jacobs because she was right about a lot of things. Jane Jacobs believes that safety comes from people. And so this comes back to parks in that if you build... Hey there, Future Mac here. Let's talk about this in a more succinct way than the first time around. When I say that parks have a problem, the problem is that they are too large and not frequent enough. And the reason why I bring up Jane Jacobs and her thought that people provide safety is because when you make parks large and infrequent, they become a destination, which makes sense for places where maybe you're going to go on a hike, where it's not in town, it's a destination, it's a trip. But there should be parks that are also just there to go to. There shouldn't have to be any process to be able to go to a local park. And that's an issue because when you make parks a destination rather than somewhere that you can just drop into, there's going to be less people there, and the people that are there are not going to be part of your community. The strength with numbers is that if your child, for example, is playing in your community and some sort of emergency happens, then the people around, though maybe they don't know your kid directly, are going to do something 9 times out of 10. Maybe even more than that. Because it's their neighborhood and they feel responsible, for the most part. And so, as is a theme of this video, a big reason why mixed use is so cool is that it gets people out. It gets people out of the house and out of the car so that they are existent in other people's worlds. Because right now, when we drive everywhere, we're not existent in other people's worlds. We're all in our cars doing our own thing. And when we get to where we're going, we're just there to get what we need and get out of there. Being able to put a grocery store and a park and a school and homes all right next to each other and whatever else you can imagine is going to create, amongst other things, safety. Cool. Okay, back to that guy. Isn't that crazy? Isn't that crazy how for decades we planned cities to have housing here and commercial over there and parks over here, and the whole time it was just let whatever happen. We're pretty sure that closing streets is better for businesses. Now, what does that mean? When people go out shopping, typically they are there for maybe a few things, or maybe they're there just to window shop. And so what you have in, say, a mall is a bunch of different storefronts all together that encourage you to keep shopping. And so this is a great strategy for a lot of stores, because if, say, I want to go shopping, I'm going to go to the mall because the mall has everything I could possibly need and way more than that. And so when we're planning things, we want to make sure that people can walk, because when you go to a place and you get what you want and your car's nearby, you might just go home. So when we close the streets, and I have a paper included about this, it tends to be the case that people will shop more because maybe there's a store across the street. And maybe if there's no cars there, you'll just walk right across and check it out. Whereas if you let cars go through there, not so much. And the study I actually included also found that surrounding streets, even surrounding the street that they closed, which in this situation was a temporary closure, but I saw other studies where there were permanent closures, other stores in the area got higher sales as well. So it seems like stores make more money when you do this mixed use, no car planning. While we're here, let's talk about pedestrianization. This is from a paper that's sort of just a literature review of other papers. And what we have here is the benefits of pedestrianization. So let's go through them. Decreases congestion. Yes, it's true. Often when you close one road, there's less confusion, especially when that road is in a downtown area. There's less likely for someone to slam on their brakes because they didn't see a pedestrian coming or a bicyclist coming. So there is a lot of instances where closing one street decreases overall congestion. Next one is safety. That's pretty much a no-brainer. When you remove cars from an area, you're way less likely to get hit by a car. Cultural value. Now, this paper was speaking specifically about historical cultural value, in that historical places often suffer when you have cars driving through them. It's going to be easier to preserve cultural value. People are going to be able to appreciate it more, and it's going to be less likely to be degraded by car traffic. Also, microclimate conditions. There's things like tailpipe emissions, as well as particle matter from tires that can be fully eliminated by simply taking cars out of the equation. Overall, typically pedestrianization is a good thing. Now, obviously, you're never going to build a city where you just walk. I mean, maybe you can, but I don't think most people would like that. Biking is fab. Now, these come from a survey of Davis residents a couple years ago, asking residents why they like biking so much. Now, this was a qualitative survey, and it was interviews. And they picked out sort of themes that they found. And the biggest three themes, although other ones were found, were feelings, activity, and bonding. Now, feelings is literal. Feelings is how it feels to be on a bike. Why do Davis residents bike? Because it feels great. The wind on your hair, the fresh air. Next one, activity. It's something to do, especially here in Davis where you have that sort of mixed use planning that I was talking about, and you can do things on a bicycle. Last one is bonding. Again, it's activity with those that you love most. I see so many families here in Davis bike around, and it's a great way to stay present with your family, and it's a great way to also give children freedom and adults freedom to go and be independent and don't need a car all the time to get to places, which is just so valuable. Now the last one is not revealed yet. We'll get into that later, but now we've got a map to look at. This is Woodland. Welcome. Now you're seeing a lot of colors right now. Let's go through that a little bit. All of the yellow here, that is low density residential. That means single family homes and large ones at that. Then you see some lighter greens in here. Those are going to be the medium density residential. We're talking condos, maybe smaller single family homes. There's a giant patch of darker green here. That is a specific plan, but to save you some time, these are some schools and the rest of this is housing. There's some spots reserved for commercial, but it's basically all housing plus 1 or 2 parks. And might I add, these ones are going to be mostly low density. As you can see right here, there's a bit of a strip going on. This is going to be a central commercial mixed use. So there's going to be a lot of commercial going on all along here of all sorts. And the reason there's different colors here is mainly just because they've labeled different areas, different names, but they all are pretty much commercial. Here and here you have a bit of a lavender color. Those are going to be the neighborhood preservation. That's going to be historic woodland. You have a lot of historic housing there. And then you have this zone up here. That's just going to be industrial things. Same with this purple bit as well. This is going to be a shopping center over here. This has the Costco where all the Davis students go. And then in pink here, we're going to have parks and schools, which are often tied together. So a lot of pinks. Those are just going to be public areas, I believe is what they're called. Oh yeah, public facilities. So parks, schools. Now let's have a refresher of some of our note cards here. Bicyclists consume. Now what you should be seeing right now is a map that I found from Woodland City showing a supposed bike loop around town. Frankly, it's a little disappointing. It doesn't go directly to half the schools that are listed on it, and it really is just kind of idealized. A lot of it is just bike lanes on semi-major roads or conveniently rerouted off of major roads. And that also ties us into this. For both of these, we're thinking about what bikes can even do and who needs bikes, right? Now, as I mentioned before, children are huge users of bikes, and so when we look at this map where we have schools so far out of the way from bicycle infrastructure, we have to question how useful that infrastructure is. Let's talk about these two again. Woodland has a problem. You can't really pedestrianize what you have here. Because realistically, when you're building a city like this where commercial is here and people living are here and here and here and here, people, especially out in these border areas, really need a pretty large excuse to even go to these places. And so as walkable as you make it, it's also important, as we touched on, to make it walk-toable. That being said, there would be a decent amount of benefits from making these places more friendly and less parking lot adjacent. We're gonna decrease congestion, which I'm sure there is a lot of on these main roads, mainly this one and this one here. It's going to increase safety for the same thing. If you are shopping in somewhere around here and you want to go to somewhere here, you're crossing, I believe that's a 6 or 7 lane major road there. And so that's not going to be very safe, and that's going to make you less likely to cross the street there. you might just hop in your car and do it, but that's added emissions and kind of inconvenient. It's gonna increase cultural value. Now, I'm sure a lot of these areas are actually decently walkable. That tends to be the case for older areas in cities. And obviously, it's gonna improve microclimate conditions. We're talking less emissions from, again, this major road here and this major road here. And I'm sure a lot of these businesses would benefit from people on foot, because when you drive in and drive out, you're much less likely to go to different stores. And I'll put a study on that in the citations. So let's do a quick ANCS evaluation here. People are looking for good aesthetics, they're looking for low noise, they're looking for community, and they're looking for safety. Aesthetics. A lot of these places here are not going to be super aesthetic unless you really like roads and houses. Now, you do have parks strewn every once in a while, but realistically what you're seeing most of the time is just other houses. Noise, again, all of these roads are going to be drivable, and they're going to be highly drivable. Not to mention, again, not to go back to it, but these roads are going to have constant flow of traffic. That's going to be a lot of noise. Now, community. Let's talk community, because oftentimes to start community, people need to meet each other. Actually, that might just be like definitionally true. And when you have places like this where there's nowhere to walk to, if you are going outside to walk, you are doing it because you want to walk. You're not walking to a park unless you're maybe in these areas. But if you're in the thick of it here, and I'm using this area a lot just because it's a great, it's probably the best example in Woodland of bad planning, but really down here too. And also here you can see the parks, whereas here it's a specific plan, so you can't see the parks. Especially if you are here and around here, you're not really going to be running into people. That's just how it works, right? So to build community out of that, you're going to have to go to other alternatives, such as maybe your kids' friends' parents or your co-workers, neither of which are easily accessible, right? When it comes to safety, I mean, the elephant in the room is cars, right? It's going to be marginally less safe anytime there is cars allowed everywhere here. And obviously people need to be able to drive home. Not everyone can bicycle or walk to work or whatever they need to be. But the point is, when you have very monotonous roads like this, you know, in a lot of neighborhoods like this, you're going to see speed bumps and stuff because people are just going to be speeding through. And beyond cars, what Jane Jacobs likes to refer to is people provide safety. And so really going back to community, when you have less people outside because there are less reasons to go outside, things become less safe, right? Whereas in a more mixed use neighborhood where, say, there's a park here and a small shopping mall maybe here and maybe medium density housing somewhere along here, there's way more likely to be people walking around. And so a quick aside here, Jane Jacobs talks about the absence of a middle option between not knowing someone and having community with someone. What I mean by that is, to have places like this, you're way less likely to have a neighbor or an employee at a local store that you don't really know, but you do know that you can turn to in time of an emergency. God forbid there's some sort of attempted kidnapping, if some kids are bullying another kid, if there's maybe an unhoused person who's unwell in the area. All of these concerns about kids, and we can deploy cops all we want, but the matter of the fact is there's much more security in simply having people around. And like I've said again and again, this sort of planning does not create that sort of environment. Biking is fab, and as we look at that map, biking is not fab. feelings are going to be canceled out by things like car traffic and car pollution and things like that. Activity, it's going to be much less of a fun activity, both biking and also getting to the place that you need to go, because again, there's quite a journey to get to anywhere you want to go. God forbid you live out here and you want to go to downtown. We're talking 2-ish miles before you get to any sort of shopping place. And bonding, again, a lot of the time in this area, in places like this, you're going to be busy concerned about the safety of the people in your party if you are traveling with other people. So what do we do about it? Well, I'd like to pull your attention to here. Now, this is actually proposed. This has not been built yet. Right now, this is a bunch of fields. And so I took a look at this specific plan, and really, I don't like the direction that it's going. Basically, in the plan, this is called a technology park, which is, I'm assuming, going to be just offices and otherwise industrial / commercial uses. All around here is going to be different kinds of residential, and I have to hand it to them. There will be some high density residential in the area. I believe all of this is going to be that. However, only this tiny little bit right here, and I believe this as well, are zoned to be mixed use. Not even commercial. None of this is made specifically for commercial, but just here and here are going to be mixed use. So this begs the question, what on earth are they thinking? Because it's just going to create more situations where people are, they're living here and they're driving elsewhere. Anytime these people want to go grocery shopping, for example, this is the closest grocery store here. Anytime these people want to go to a park, this pink strip here is supposedly open space, and if not, then they could go here, I suppose, though this is a giant field right now. Or they could go here, this is a park. But again, it's the same issues that this area and this area and this area all face. There's nothing to do but drive elsewhere. And same for these businesses here, right? Most of the time people do need to drive to work. That's just the nature of things. But my point is, people are going to be driving into here. I mean, especially with this exit here, people are going to be driving in and out of here all the time. So what does that mean for all of this residential around here? I would say the biggest problem that Woodland has right now that is decently fixable is the locations of their grocery stores. Now, if we look at Woodland and the amount of grocery stores they have and the placement of them, I know this is a rough image, and I know that there's a Costco right here next to the Target. We can see that just like the rest of commercial, grocery stores are often centralized and are out of reach for a lot of the more bordering housing. For example, in this development here, which came about in the 2000s, this area right here was zoned, as well as I believe an area right here was zoned for mixed use commercial. However, if you pull up Google Maps, you will find that both of these are just empty fields. And so this is all residential plus schools and parks. What needs to be done, especially when you consider that Woodland has, give or take, double the amount of grocery stores as Davis, despite having about the same population, is we need to change the way we're distributing these grocery stores. I personally would look at a school or a park and put a grocery store there, somewhere like here and somewhere like here, where someone can, maybe kids can get off of school and go to the grocery store, or someone picking up their kids can also hit the grocery store and hit a park while they're at it, because they're all in the same place. That's why we need mixed use planning, because with it, we can properly give people access to commercial without having to drive. And that's a big deal. Another thing I would do is make proper greenways like Davis. Now, I know that wouldn't be super easy, and choosing where that would go would be quite difficult, but if you had these mixed use centers, it maybe wouldn't be so hard. Maybe, let's say this was a mixed use center instead of just a park and a school. We'll call this little area like a grocery store. How about that? We could make some sort of bike loop that maybe went like this. Maybe it cuts through here and goes around here. I know you guys can't really see it, but you can follow my pencil here. And that would connect this to here, and maybe go back up here and cut through here, something like that. It's really hard to tell, but just like that, we've created a loop that looks roughly like that. That's going to be a much smaller and more traversable loop, and frankly, a lot more utilizable than something like the one that I found on the website, which again, I'll put up here, which just makes huge circles that don't really add much value at all, let alone protection for the people taking these routes. And obviously, it's going to be hard to shift an entire downtown like this and disperse it into neighboring areas, but that might be aided by something like a pretty solid bus line, which I know Woodland has some, but you could always use some more. And what Woodland lacks, like a lot of places, is dedicated bus lanes so that these buses can actually be at least decently comparable to just taking a car, because buses are a more efficient way of traveling in terms of emissions and amount of people moved, and it's a lot more accessible for people who can't drive, like the elderly, children, people who can't afford a car, people that I've mentioned before. So how about this? Let's disperse our grocery stores. Now, I counted 13. Let's say we have 10. Now, I'm looking on this map. I'm seeing residential and school here, 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 and a little bit going on up here. So we can leave this shopping center. That's decently usable for these guys. Maybe we would close this road and make people on the freeway go this way. So let's close this road to cars, so there's less congestion as well, because I know there's a lot of cars that come through here, as well as up this road from Davis. So one grocery store. Let's put a second one next to the freeway here. We'll put one down here because it's zoned for it already. We'll put one here because this is a somewhat large school. We'll put one up here because that's more public facilities. We can keep one of the many ones that are around here. Maybe we plot one on the edge of town down here. We'll put one here. Oh yes, we already put one here. How about we put one here so that this freeway can serve it. Now we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 grocery stores. That's the same amount that Davis has. Now this is going to be way more accessible for people, right? People down here, when they need to go to a grocery store, we're talking going all the way over here. This may be half the distance that they needed to go. And it's because we changed the usage of this area to mixed use. That's going to be half the gas spent on groceries, and while that doesn't sound like very much, if you spend $1, say, on gas going to here and coming back, that's $2. If you go grocery shopping, say, once a week, which most people are going to do it more often than that, especially when it comes to recipe shopping, when it comes to snacks, let's say 2 a week actually. 2 trips a week, $1 each way. If your car isn't super efficient, then we're talking $4 a week times 52. That's going to save people $200, and that is per household. Each one of these streets here, see this little line right here? This is going to have probably 10 houses on it. Think about how many houses are in this area, and think about the amount of money that would be saved for people living in this housing by simply shortening a trip by 5 minutes. I mean, if we do some quick math here, we're talking Woodland, a city with 60,000 people. If we assume that even half of the population gets these kind of benefits, we're talking about 200 times 30,000 people. That's $6 million saved in a year. It makes a world of difference, and that's just a more quantifiable measure, right? We're also talking about safety and, angst and stuff like that. Or other fiscal benefits, like maybe someone might choose to not buy a new car because they don't really need one. That's savings on insurance and maintenance. There's after-school programs where kids, if they can't get home on their own, maybe parents are giving out more money than they would ever want to just make sure that their kids are safe and have somewhere to go after school. And there's so many other considerations that are similar to these. I would call our little experiment here a success. Let's do another experiment. Let's make better bike paths. So we have this circle here. Let's make another one like such, so that serves the school. This is another grocery store and public facility. We will make a loop like such. Goes past the fairgrounds there. We've got one here. Let's make a loop like such. Here. That goes under the freeway. That's a little difficult. Maybe we can find a way behind the houses like so. Maybe we would take this one and go like such. And this is going to be no cars anymore, so we can just toss the bikes on here and they can go to the shopping center, which is nice. And we've got grocery store here. We can make a loop like such, perhaps. There's a park here, so that's good that we connected that. And so all of these loops here are probably going to be just about a mile or two long, which is pretty traversable even on foot, let alone on bike. So after all of that, we can see that this is pretty doable and pretty useful for that matter. I'm actually going to add another store here, and then we'll make a loop like such. Again, super, super easy. This loop is not going to be long at all, and unlike, a loop that's just there for fun, this loop is going to get people from home to school, from home to park, from park to school, from school to grocery store, from grocery store to home, and so on. It's a much more self-contained environment that fosters community, and I won't even get into it because I already have, but it's just a smarter way to design. We know a lot about what makes a city good and what makes a city bad for all different kinds of groups, whether that be cars, whether that be people, whether that be certain kinds of people, maybe certain kinds of people over other kinds of people. And something that is so critical not to forget is that there are already people there. The counterpart to Jane Jacobs' movement was Robert Moses. Robert Moses was one of the most powerful bureaucrats in New York City history, and New York State history for that matter. Robert Moses also wanted to fix urban issues. Robert Moses and his approach was extremely inappropriate, to say the least. Robert Moses and those who agreed with his teachings often saw places that were less economically active, less economically efficient as bad. These places would earn the badge of blighted. And what would follow is many of these places were leveled. People were displaced, people lost their homes, and in their place, different shapes of housing. Now, granted, these forms of housing were not informed by academia for the most part. They often made less sense and were just entirely inappropriate, especially considering the amount of disproportionately racial minority and impoverished the victims of this displacement were. Now, I like to think that we've moved past that. But the point of me bringing that up is that urban planning has a history with doing things without the consent of people. And so the big question mark here is considering not physical displacement, but economic displacement. And what I mean by that is when you make places mixed use, and when you make places nicer to live in, that's what causes gentrification. And for those not familiar with gentrification, what I mean is when you make a place nicer to live, people are willing to pay more for it. And so what will happen is people with higher incomes will come to these places, they will move in, landlords will raise the prices, surrounding stores such as grocery stores will raise their food prices, and many people who didn't ask for any of these changes will be priced out of their own neighborhood. Now, is this to say that we shouldn't do anything about places that are not safe or nice to live in? No. If anything, I'm saying we should have more of these places, because if the entire country looks like this, looks like mixed use, looks like smart design, looks like somewhere where you can raise your children and not have to worry about them getting hit by a car, then no prices will go up because everywhere will be like that. The last paper I want to talk about is about Davis, and it's about Davis's growth control. Now, in the late 70s, Davis and the people within Davis decided that it would be best to conserve the character of the city if they put a control on not only exterior growth, like around the borders of the city, but as well as population. And while this does have a positive effect on maintaining bikeways, maintaining the culture within Davis, it also raises prices. It makes Davis more exclusive and less accessible for those who need that walkability and bikeability. And that's not to say that not everyone deserves that, but it is a consideration when we're talking about equitability and we're talking about why we're doing all of this in the first place. And while there are strategies when it comes to growth control and when it comes to conserving a town's culture, it will raise the prices. That's what this study found, was that the prices for housing in Davis are higher. Anyone could tell you that, but it's true. So when we're making changes to a place like Woodland, we have to consider who's there. And we should consider programs like setting aside some housing to be affordable. And what we should not consider is taking someone's home by force. Now, that's not to say that maybe the city could buy back housing, but you have to be careful about it. And of course, to finish this off, I'd like to say all of this is an uphill battle, because at the end of the day, the upfront costs of building mixed-use housing is much more. It is very inexpensive and easy to cookie cutter houses and neighborhoods. While it's super easy to do this up front, we have to consider all of the costs because of this. We have to consider every time someone drives to a grocery store. We have to consider every time someone drives their kid to school. We have to consider the emissions from all of those. We have to consider the community value that would come from something like a mixed-use neighborhood. We have to consider safety as well, not only in the road, but having people out and about that are able to look out for other people, which is something that you don't see nearly as often in these developments that are all housing or all shopping, because people are come and go. And just all of the things that I talked about earlier in this video. The point is, this is the better way to do it. We just need to do it properly. Anyways, I hope this video was informative for you. I hope you learned something about urban planning. I hope you learned something about the problems. Thanks for watching.